Okay, I want to apologize first that it's taken me a while to get this video up for you all. I've tried to record it a couple times, and every time I've gotten booted out of the recording. I think it's because it's set up so the software set up to keep people from pirating other software or pirating videos from YouTube and that sort of thing. So I will not be clicking on any of the links on this PowerPoint. I've already loaded the PowerPoint for you all as an individual document, so you should be able to access the links through that PowerPoint that way. I believe I either uploaded it as PDF or PowerPoint. If not, please contact me and I will get it loaded. So I'm going to try to talk through this relatively quickly so that you don't have to sit and stare at slides forever, because slides are not always that interesting. So I'm going to skip over these things because you can read it, but I do want to talk a bit about form. Form is never more than an extension of content, is something poet Robert Creeley said in the early 20th century, mid-20th century actually. And the idea is that since poetry is the art of language, as Turco said, that anything we do with the language should actually extend the content. It should add to the content. It should make the content more interesting. So what poets attempt to do with their language, actually, with the order of the words, with the syntax, which I talk about in the previous slideshow and lesson, and also with sound, is they try to evoke the content of the poem, the meanings, the feelings of the poem, a little more effectively than prose would. So what is form? Form, as a general idea, is the design of a thing as a whole, the configuration of its parts. But this definition might not really help you better understand what we mean by form when we talk about poetry. There's a great article, you can go to that link there, The Pursuit of Form, by the poet Robert Pinsky. Form, there's a lot of different views on form. The basic idea is that all form is received, but all ideas, all structures, all beliefs, all interactions, all human thought is essentially uh, formal. That we place things in form in order to understand them. And so that's what we mean by a received form. And so poetry is an attempt to, in a lot of ways, place language in a container that more effectively expresses concepts that are outside of the range of normal language. You look at something like the Keats poem on this slide. This living hand, now warm and capable of earnest grasping, would, if it were cold and in the icy silence of the tomb, so haunt thy days and chill thy dreaming nights, that thou wouldst wish thine own heart dry of blood, so in my veins red life might stream again. And though thou be conscious calmed, see here it is, I hold it towards you. So this kind of structure is meant to enhance the image of the hand. And you got to understand that poetry was a pre-visual art form when it first initiated. It was a sonic art form. Print was not yet very popular. Early poetry was all recited. It was all oral. So sound was very important. And then once the printing press, like in Keats's time, became important, then the image on the page suddenly began to be more important, and that's when I talk about syntax. So form, when we consider form, we often divide it into two categories: open form and closed form. Open form is probably what most of the poetry in the 20th century and 21st century is written in, although there has been an increasing popularity of closed form of late. Uh, what open form poets do is they try to see writing as a process rather than a quest for an absolute. I think that's a value-laden statement. I think all poets see writing as a process, whether it's to work within a form or not. The big difference between open form and closed form really is that a closed form is a received form that has a tradition and history and an expectation around it. So if you choose to write in sonnets, or you call a poem a sonnet, there's a certain expectation that it will meet certain guidelines. Whereas if you don't choose to write in a closed form, something like In Jest by E.E. Cummings over there on the side, one of my favorite poems, there's still an expectation, because it's poetry, that the language will be heightened, that the language will be more intense, that the way the language is moving across the page, in this case, it's very obvious that there's an attempt at extended meaning by compressing words like Eddie and Bill into single compound words, spelling Balloon Man the way it does, the way he does, and extending the oohs with the double O's, that sort of thing. The far and we, the repetition. This has form. It's just what's called a nonce form, a form that is not established within a tradition. But there's still an expectation here that some of those elements we think of in poetry, such as rhythm, rhyme, lineation, syntax, those things all still exist very much in open form poems. So then you look at a closed form poem like this one. This is a Shakespearean sonnet, but it's a very strange Shakespearean sonnet in that there's no enjambment. That means the lines do not continue from line to line. The syntactical units, every line is end stopped. Every line ends with a period. And every line in this summarizes an actual Shakespearean play. And it's in a Shakespearean rhyme scheme, but are really what would be a Wyatt rhyme scheme, because it was Wyatt who came up with this rhyme scheme for the English sonnet. Anyway, the point of all this is that this is a closed form poem, but it has so many potentials, and it breaks the expectations of what a Shakespearean sonnet should do, because we really want enjambment. We want the syntactical units to go from line to line to heighten the meaning, to make the meaning more powerful for us. But in this case, every in-stopped line, it really does read like the old TV listings, which, if you've ever read a TV guide from back in the day, these sentences never did justice to the plays themselves. Here's another sonnet, and this sonnet is, well, let me just read it to you and warn you that it's not exactly what you would expect from a sonnet, but it's by Marilyn Hacker, and it's a beautiful piece of poetry. Didn't Sappho say her guts clutched up like this before a face suddenly numinous? Her eyes watered, knees melted. Did she lactate again, milk brought down by a girl's kiss? Its documented torrents are unloosed by such events as recently produced not the wish, but the need to consume in us 1 pint of Maalox, 1 of kaopectate. My eyes and groin are permanently swollen. I'm alternatingly brilliant and witless and sleepless. Bed is just a swamp to roll in, although I'd cream my jeans touching your breast. Sweetheart, it isn't lust, it's all the rest of what I want with you that scares me shitless. I mean, it's an amazing poem, and I mean, yes, it has vulgarity in it and sexuality in it, but if you think Shakespeare doesn't have those things, I got another thing coming. You need to go back and reread it. Shakespeare does have it, and she's working within the sonnet form, just like R.S. Gwynne is here in this poem. But she's approaching it differently, and you can see how the rhyme scheme is different. You can see how the lines are in jams, so the sentences carry over from line to line. You can feel the rhythm a little differently. It doesn't feel as witty in that sense. It's more passionate. So we're not going to look at these, but I do want you, if you have access to the slideshow, to look some of these things up and listen to them. They do have some offensive language, but I want you to hear the rhythm in them. I want you to think about them. You know, none of those poems linked on that slide appear in your text, but if you want to see how the poems are shaped, it is encouraged that students search online for the actual wording, the syntax. We talked about syntax. The word order really affects the way we read a poem. So one of the things word order creates is meter. And you see here an example from Witty Pate. For a youth to live by his wits, then I should think, where we look at the stresses. And meter or scansion, looking at what lines are stressed in a poem, is really an art more than it is a science. And I want you to remember that, because a lot of students get really frustrated with meter, and I don't want you to get frustrated with it. I want you to see it as another way to enter into a poem, in the same way that learning the beat of a song is a way to enter into a song. Again, we won't get to look at these or practice this, but listen to some of these songs, see if you can link to them, and a lot of these things will help you pick out the stresses. So, like, this is a rhyme from Commons the Corner. Black church services, murderers ever serving burgers, as cats with gold permanents move they bags as herbalists. The dirt isn't just fertile, it's people working and earning this. The curb getters go where the cats flow and the current is. It's so hot that niggas burn to live. The furnaces, whether money moving, the determined live. We talk shit, play lotto, and buy German beers. It's so black packed with action that it's affirmative. You know, I mean, it's silly having me say that because I don't come from that culture. So y'all are probably cracking up right now. But even with the way I'm saying it, and if you go back and listen to the way Common says it, you can hear these stresses. That's where each of these bars are. You can hear that he's emphasizing those syllables. It's not that the other syllables are not enunciated. They're just not as strong as the ones that we have here. So we have a trochee there, that's a stress slack. We have an IM, a slack stress. We have some others: anapes, slack, slack, stress, trochee, stress, slack, dactyl, stress, slack, slack, monosyllabic, foot, stress, spondy has two stresses. So you can see these different lines. My life had stood a loaded gun, that a maid in there lived, that a maid in there lived, whom you may know by the name of Annabelle. Tiger, tiger, burning bright in the forest of the night. Take her up, tenderly lift her with care. So poetry is the art of language, which includes syntax and sound. But you have to remember that these divisions are largely artificial. They're ways of understanding the poem so that we can help develop an art around it. In the same way that a painting is made up of the different brush strokes, the different ways the paint combines, the way the painter sees the strokes in their mind or sketches the painting out ahead of time. All those elements, the shape, even the frame that is chosen to put around a painting, all of those things go into making the painting have a certain effect. Our paint in poetry is the sound and syntax and emotion and all those ideas as they connect. So the music of poetry is not something which exists apart, that should say apart, sorry, from the meaning. So there's some other terms like this, right? Remember Ars Poetica and the sounds in it. This one, which is great, it's not actually in this page of your textbook, it's on a different page, it is in there, but the world is charged with the grandeur of God. It will flame out like shining from shook foil. It gathers to a greatness like the ooze of oil. Crushed, why do men then now not wreck his rod? Generations have trod, have trod, have trod, and all is seared with trade, bleared, smeared with toil, and wears man's smudge and shares man's smell. The soil is bare now, nor can foot feel being shod, and for all this nature is never spent. There lives the dearest freshness deep down things, and though the last lights of the black west went, O morning at the brown brink eastward springs, because the Holy Ghost over the bent world broods with warm breast and with awe bright wings. And you can feel yourself out of breath at the end of the poem and the way the stresses fall. The world is charged with the grandeur of God. It will flame out like shining from shook foil. You have these spondies, shook foil. We have the have trod, have trod, have trod, the iams. It's just beautiful the way the stresses really make this poem work. You know, this is a sonnet as well as this. This is a sonnet I wrote. They must have knelt on opposite sides of the mattress, felt the feathers separate under the loosely sewn cloth as they prayed. My father and mother were caught in the heat that causes cotton to stick to chests, the heat that swells and rises with the rhythm of breath. And how long father and mother must have knelt and waited and prayed for enough light to fill the room to see their skin glistening and wet as a body after its steps from baptismal water. Touch was not enough knowledge for them. They needed to see bristle on face, to taste salt on brow, to smell meat on tongue. Father and mother needed to see the grips gouge on the other skin, to know that this was a beginning, to know that this was a moment like being cast out of the garden. You see how the rhyme scheme's different, the sound is different. These are both closed forms. These are both sonnets, but they look utterly different. Their sounds are utterly different. They share the 14-line structure. They share some syntactical structures, but everything is utterly different in these poems. So, form is meant to aid the poet in transforming mere symbols and grunts into something that can communicate effectively that which is impossible to communicate. I once heard the poet Marvin Bell say, "Poetry uses words to get beyond words." That idea has stuck with me. Closed form, open form, rhyme, rhythm, scansion, etc. These are tools for the poet to use to extend his or her content and truly move the reader in some way. So I assume a few things. It assumes that you've read all the assigned readings. The lesson, therefore, does not go into extreme detail concerning every term you have encountered. It also assumes that you have completed all the quizzes and really understand at least the denotations of these terms, what they mean literally. Poetry becomes richer when one can look at a poem and identify its form, or can think about how the formal choices a poet makes help to extend his or her content. So it's very important as you complete this essay, as you're thinking about developing this essay, that you understand these concepts. These concepts are essential to your appreciation of the poem, of poetry in general. So I hope this lesson has been helpful. Please email me if you have any questions, but take advantage of that discussion board as well, as it's going to be very useful.